It takes exactly 3 seconds for a corporate career built over 14 years to completely dissolve into thin air. I stood in the windowless conference room at Summit Industries, watching the dust motes dance in the fluorescent light, while the human resources director slids a single sheet of paper across the cheap laminate table. She did not look at me. Instead, she kept her focus on a printed spreadsheet, checking boxes with a silver pen. Sitting next to her was our newly appointed Director of Manufacturing Excellence, a 29-year-old graduate who had joined the company as an intern only 9 months ago. On that sheet of paper was my annual compensation review. It declared that my salary adjustment for the coming fiscal year would be a mere 3.5%. In a year when the regional consumer price index was rising at over 8%, this was not a raise. It was a pay cut disguised as corporate generosity. I looked at the young director, who wore an expensive suit and carried himself with the supreme confidence of someone who had never seen an actual steam turbine fail or felt the ground shake during an emergency venting. He had a degree from a prestigious business school, which apparently made him worth 75% more than my 27 years of keeping chemical processes running safely. I am Peter Vance. Most of the operators and technicians on the refinery floor just call me Pete. I am 54 years old, and my entire professional life has been dedicated to process safety control systems. I spent 8 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, troubleshooting water treatment facilities and remote power grids under high-stress conditions. After leaving the service, I worked in several smaller industrial facilities before landing at Summit Industries 14 years ago. Back then, the plant was managed by veterans who understood that chemical manufacturing is a high-risk endeavor where a single instrumentation failure can result in catastrophic product loss or worse. I earned my reputation by volunteering for the weekend shifts and emergency calls that younger engineers avoided. When a critical batch began to crystallize or a pressure valve stuck at midnight, the instruction was always to contact me. Over the years, I redesigned the human-machine interfaces for the entire facility, wrote the safety, interlock safety protocols, and meticulously documented every quirk of our control loops. I did not do it for executive recognition. I did it because I respected the raw materials we processed and wanted to make sure every worker went home safely at the end of their shift. But things changed when Aegis Operations acquired the facility. They brought in a new chief executive officer who spoke constantly about digital transformation and eliminating tribal knowledge in favor of automated systems. They hired young analysts like Zachary Caldwell, who could build beautiful charts showing operational efficiencies but had never held a wrench or sat in a control room during a severe thunderstorm. Zachary believed that 27 years of hands-on experience could be replaced by cloud-based analytics and wireless sensors. He pushed to reduce scheduled maintenance windows and started publishing internal reports comparing the high wages of senior technical staff to the lower entry-level rates of recent college graduates. He had even presented a slide deck that highlighted my compensation, arguing that keeping legacy systems running did not require a premium salary. Now, I was facing the reality of his strategic plan. Accept the terms, or you are free to explore other opportunities. Brenda Kelly, the Human Resources Director, said, her voice flat and devoid of any personal animosity. We must maintain internal equity across our operations. The leadership development track requires us to recruit premium educational credentials, and those command a different market valuation. I did not raise my voice. I did not remind her of the winter storm in 2016, when I spent 36 continuous hours at the plant to prevent the cooling jackets on reactor 3 from freezing, saving a batch worth $1,200,000 and protecting the primary reactor vessel from cracking. I did not mention the 5 separate occasions where my manual override procedures prevented serious environmental violations. I simply reached into my leather briefcase, pulled out my signed resignation letter, and placed it on top of her spreadsheet. I choose to leave, I said quietly. My resignation is effective at 1:30 in the afternoon today. Brenda stared at the paper as if it were a faulty transmitter throwing random errors. Surely you want to discuss this over the weekend, Peter, she said, her composure slipping slightly. We can review the performance metrics again next week. No, I replied. You have made it clear how you value my contribution. I believe you. I sign name using the same black ink pen I used to certify safety documents. At exactly 1:32 in the afternoon, my building access badge was deactivated. By 1:37, my remote connections to the control systems were terminated. I packed my personal coffee mug, my safety glasses, and my notebook containing 14 years of technical observations. I walked out to my truck, leaving the plant behind, knowing that while procedures can be written down, the experience required to interpret them under pressure cannot be copied into a database. As I started the engine, I looked back at the tall distillation columns against the afternoon sky, wondering how long the young director's spreadsheets would hold the refinery together. I sat in my truck in the employee parking lot for a few minutes, watching the shift change take place. The sun was hot, and the truck thermometer read 84 degrees Fahrenheit. It was unusually warm for this time of year, the kind of ambient temperature that always caused the legacy cooling loops on the older reactors to run close to their thermal limits. I knew from my daily logs that the pressure transmitter on Reactor 3 had a calibration drift that made it read 20 pounds per square inch higher than actual when the external temperature exceeded 75 degrees. It was a minor hardware quirk I had documented in our local maintenance files back in 2021, but the physical replacement had been deferred by Zachary Caldwell because it did not align with his digital modernization budget. My personal cell phone buzzed. It was an automated notification from the refinery emergency messaging system. Because I had designed the emergency response protocols, my personal number was still registered on the primary contact list. The text was brief: Level 2 process alarm, Reactor 3 pressure deviation, qualified personnel report to control room immediately. I stared at the screen, feeling a familiar pull to return, to walk back through the gates and point the operators to the manual bypass valve. But I was no longer an employee of Summit Industries. My badge was sitting in a plastic bin on Brenda Kelly's desk, and my legal authority to touch the systems had ended 20 minutes ago. My phone buzzed again, this time with a direct text message from Keith Henderson, the senior operator on the afternoon shift. Keith had worked at the plant for 10 years and was a solid technician, but he was not an instrument specialist. "Pete, you still in the parking lot?" he wrote, using my old nickname. "Reactor 3 pressure is spiking, and the automation has locked the feed line. Zachary is in the control room, telling us to remote reset the safety interlocks from the terminal. Can you come back for just 10 minutes? I typed my response slowly, ensuring there was no ambiguity. "I do not work there anymore, Keith. Do not let anyone override the safety interlocks. Follow emergency procedure number EP003. Within seconds, Keith replied. "We cannot find EP003 in the document library. The system says it is pending administrative review." I closed my eyes, remembering the meeting 3 months ago when Zachary had flagged that specific safety procedure. He had argued that manual safety bypasses were obsolete and that his new automated algorithms would handle any pressure deviations. He had placed my procedure in a pending file, refusing to release it to the active system until he could run a digital simulation. The simulation had never occurred because he was too busy preparing slides for the corporate board. I put my truck in gear and drove toward the exit gate. In my rearview mirror, I saw the flashing orange warning lights on the roof of the main control building. The afternoon breeze carried the faint, rhythmic sound of the steam relief valves, cycling on Reactor 3. They were trying to vent the pressure, but if the transmitter calibration drift was causing the automation to read the pressure as dangerously high, the system would keep the safety cooling loops closed to prevent thermal shock, creating a loop that would eventually stall the entire reactor. At 1:55 in the afternoon, as I was driving down the highway, my phone rang. The screen displayed the name of Henry Miller, the chief financial officer of the division. I pulled over to the shoulder of the highway before answering. "Peter, thank goodness you picked up," Henry said, his voice tense with anxiety. "We have a critical situation with Reactor 3. The control system has locked up, and we are facing a complete production shutdown. Zachary says the pressure relief valve is malfunctioning and wants to bypass the safety interlocks." Henry, do not let him do that, I warned. Reactor 3 has a known calibration drift. The sensor reads 20 pounds per square inch high when the temperature is 84 degrees. If he bypasses the interlocks, the automated system will lose its safety boundaries and could cause a cascade shutdown of the entire cooling system. He needs to send a technician to read the physical pressure gauge on the reactor vessel. If the physical reading is normal, they must adjust the alarm limit in the control software and manually start the cooling pump. Can you just come back and do it? Henry pleaded. We will pay you for a full day of consulting work right now. No, Henry, I said. I am no longer your safety net. You chose to support a structure that values credentials over actual operational expertise. You told me my knowledge was traditional and outdated. Now you can use your modern systems to resolve the emergency. I hung up the phone. At exactly 2:22 in the afternoon, the emergency system sent a Level 3 alert. Plant-wide production hold. Reactor 3 emergency shutdown. Non-essential personnel clear the area. The system had failed safe, just as I had designed it to do, but the batch of specialty chemicals was now trapped inside the cooling vessel without circulation, beginning to solidify into a useless mass of plastic. The solidification of a chemical batch in Reactor 3 is a slow, silent process. Once the cooling circulation stops and the temperature drops below the crystallization point, the liquid monomer turns into a dense, solid block of polymer. It takes only a few hours for the vessel to become a solid chunk of plastic, requiring weeks of manual labor to drill out. The direct replacement cost of the raw materials was $1,200,000, but the true financial impact was much larger. The refinery lost $350,000 in daily production revenue for every day the unit was offline, and the customer was a major aerospace supplier with strict contract terms regarding delivery schedules. I was at home, sitting in my kitchen, when my phone rang again at 2:35 in the afternoon. This time it was Clara Higgins, the personal assistant to Preston Thorne, the chief executive officer. Peter, Mr. Thorne needs you to join an emergency conference call immediately, she said, her voice formal but carrying a hint of panic. The engineering team is unable to reset the reactor control sequence, and we have a major regulatory concern. Clara, I am no longer an employee of Summit Industries, I replied calmly, pouring a cup of coffee. I cannot access the systems, and I have no legal authority to advise your engineering team. Mr. Thorne is prepared to offer you an immediate consulting contract, she said quickly. We can arrange the paperwork by Monday, but we need your help on this call right now. I took a sip of my coffee. Clara, if the company requires my services, they can contact Aegis Operations' main corporate office, or they can hire me through my new employer. I have already accepted a position with Consolidated Chemical, and I start on Monday morning. They are paying me 50% more than my previous salary, and they actually value the experience required to keep a plant running safely. There was a silence on the line, followed by the sound of a door opening. Preston Thorne's voice came through the speaker. Peter, this is Preston. We are looking at a potential environmental release if we cannot control the pressure inside the vessel. This is a matter of public safety. Surely you can put aside our compensation dispute for a few hours to help us prevent a disaster. Mr. Thorne, I replied, the safety interlocks on Reactor 3 are designed to fail safe. There is no danger of an environmental release as long as your staff does not attempt to bypass the mechanical safety systems. The reactor is safely shut down, just as the safety protocols dictate. The only thing you are losing right now is money, because the batch is crystallizing due to your director's decision to bypass my maintenance procedures. What will it take to get you back here today? Preston demanded, his executive patience clearly exhausted. We are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars by the hour. My consulting rate for emergency process safety response is $480 per hour, with a non-negotiable 50-hour minimum contract, I said. I will also require a written safety waiver signed by your insurance representative before I touch any of the terminal systems. 50 hours at $480 is $24,000, Preston said, his voice rising. That is an absurd rate for a few minutes of system configuration. That is the cost of the expertise you chose to let walk out of your building this morning, I answered. You told me my skills were easily replaced by automated programs. Now, you are discovering what those programs cost when there is no one left who knows how to run them. I hung up the phone and spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden with my wife, Laura. She had been worried about our financial security when I left the plant, especially with our daughter, Chloe, preparing to enter her sophomore year at Purdue University, which cost $75,000 per year in tuition and expenses. We still had 15 years left on our home mortgage, and my income was the primary source of support for our family. But as I showed her the signed contract from Consolidated Chemical, her anxiety began to ease. They had been trying to recruit me for 2 years, and the new position came with a dedicated technical budget and authority over all process safety decisions. The phone on the kitchen table continued to ring, but I left it there, letting the refinery management experience the silent consequences of their strategic decisions. I walked down the garden path, feeling a deep sense of relief that the burden of keeping that plant running was no longer mine to bear. For 14 years, I had carried that responsibility every single night, waking up at the slightest sound of my phone. Now the management team was discovering that automation is only as good as the human understanding behind it. They had ignored the warnings, and now they had to face the consequences of their choices. I sat on the wooden bench under the oak tree with Laura, talking about Chloe's future. We discussed her dreams of studying chemical engineering and how she would learn to respect the physical systems she designed. It was a peaceful afternoon, a stark contrast to the chaos currently unfolding in the refinery control room. I knew they were running around, desperately trying to find a workaround, but some problems cannot be solved with a quick fix. They require the slow, patient accumulation of experience, the very thing they had decided was no longer worthy of compensation. My time at Summit Industries was officially over, and my loyalty now belonged to a company that respected my expertise. At 5:45 in the afternoon, my phone rang again. The caller identification showed a number I did not recognize, but the area code was from the corporate headquarters of Aegis Operations. I decided to answer it. "This is Evelyn Crawford," a voice said. "I am a member of the board of directors for Aegis Operations. I understand there has been a significant operational incident at the refinery today, and that your resignation occurred shortly before the system failure." "Yes, Mrs. Crawford," I said. "That is correct. I resigned effective at 1:30 this afternoon. I would like to understand your perspective on how this situation developed," she said. "The reports I am receiving from local management are conflicting, and the projected financial losses are already exceeding $4 million. I sat down at the kitchen table and explained the situation clearly, without emotion. I told her about the annual review, the decision to limit my compensation scene to a 3.5% adjustment, and the young director's belief that technical experience had no market premium compared to management credentials. I explained the specific issue with Reactor 3's calibration drift, the safety procedure I had written to address it, and how Zachary Caldwell had blocked that procedure in the system. "And what occurred after you left?" she asked. "According to the reports, the operators attempted to override the safety systems." "Yes," I replied. "Zachary Caldwell attempted to remote reset the safety interlocks from the control terminal. He did this because he did not understand that the pressure alarms were driven by temperature-dependent sensors drift. By overriding the interlocks, he bypassed the physical safety limits, which caused the control valves to lock and the chemical batch to solidify." "But there is a more serious issue," I continued, leaning forward. "When I designed those safety control protocols, I did not transfer the intellectual property rights to Summit Industries. Under federal copyright law, Title 17, United States Code, Section 106, I am the sole owner of the proprietary software scripts that manage the human-machine interface. The company has a license to use those scripts while I am employed, but there is no agreement allowing them to modify or run my custom code without my authorizations once my employment terminates. By allowing an unlicensed manager to modify those safety control loops, the company committed direct copyright infringement under federal law. Furthermore," I added, "under state administrative regulations, Any manual override of a safety-critical process interlock must be authorized and supervised by a licensed professional engineer. Zachary Caldwell is not an engineer. He has only a business administration degree. By allowing him to perform a manual safety override, the refinery management violated state safety codes and effectively voided your commercial liability insurance policy. The board of directors is now facing direct personal liability for the $4,200,000 in total losses because the insurance company will refuse to cover a loss caused by unlicensed personnel performing illegal safety overrides. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of papers rustling as Evelyn Crawford processed the legal consequences. "Are you certain about the insurance policy clauses?" she asked, her voice dropping to a serious whisper. "Yes," I said. "I reviewed those terms with the insurance auditors during the annual safety inspection last year. They were very clear that safety interlock integrity is a non-negotiable condition of the policy." Evelyn cleared her throat. "Peter, would you be willing to serve as an independent technical consultant directly for the board of directors? We need a comprehensive review of our process safety management system, and we need someone who can document the critical safety procedures that currently exist only in institutional memory. We are prepared to offer a contract of $120,000 to $150,000 for a comprehensive 3-month assessment." "I will consider it, Mrs. Crawford," I replied. "But any agreement must go through my new employer, Consolidated Chemical, and it must include a full legal release from any liability regarding today's incident. I will not clean up local management's mistakes until the board takes formal action to address the lack of competence in the engineering department." "I understand," she said. "I will speak with our legal counsel and call you back tomorrow morning. Thank you for your honesty, Peter." After we hung up, I sat at the table for a long time, watching the shadows lengthen across the kitchen floor. I knew that the board of directors was not acting out of kindness. They were acting because they were terrified of the legal consequences. A $4 million loss was bad enough, but personal liability and a voided insurance policy could ruin the entire corporation. They had built a system where spreadsheets and titles were everything, but now they were forced to confront the harsh reality of physical systems. You cannot run a chemical refinery on corporate jargon. You need the quiet, steady expertise of people who know how the valves turn and why the sensors drift. I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that the truth was finally speaking louder than their credentials. I went to the living room to join Laura, feeling the weight of the day finally lifting from my shoulders. We had survived the storm, and we were stepping into a future where our worth was recognized. The board would call again, because they had no other choice. The board of directors acted with surprising speed once they realized the extent of their personal financial exposure. By Monday morning, Zachary Caldwell had been dismissed from the company for violating safety protocols and performing unauthorized system overrides. Brenda Kelly from Human Resources was also terminated for her failure to manage the transition of safety-critical personnel. And the chief executive officer, Preston Thorne, was placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a formal investigation by the board. The physical recovery of Reactor 3 was a slow and expensive process. It took a specialized maintenance crew 4 weeks to drill the solidified polymer out of the vessel, and the total repair costs, including the replacement of 2 damaged control valves, reached $260,000. The total production loss from the 4-week shutdown was calculated at $4,200,000, bringing the total cost of the incident to $6.8 million. The customer canceled their contract and shifted their business to Consolidated Chemical, which was exactly where I was now working as the Senior Technical Fellow for Process Safety. I accepted the board's consulting offer through Consolidated Chemical, spending my weekends over the next 6 months reviewing the safety systems at my old plant. I identified 34 safety-critical procedures that had never been properly integrated into the digital documentation system because they were considered too traditional by the previous management. I compiled these into a comprehensive safety manual that became known as the Vance Protocol. Under the new guidelines, Any manual override of a safety interlock required the written authorization of a licensed professional engineer and the physical presence of a senior operator. The consulting fees I earned from that project were sufficient to pay for my daughter, Chloe's first 2 years of engineering tuition at Purdue University, allowing us to support her education without taking out a second mortgage or touching our retirement savings. My new job at Consolidated Chemical provided a 75% salary increase compared to my old rate at Summit Industries, and I was given a dedicated budget to train a new generation of process control specialists. 3 years after my resignation, I was sitting in a coffee shop near the plant when Keith Henderson walked in. He had been promoted to plant engineering manager under the new technical fellow track, which compensated technical experts based on their operational knowledge rather than their management titles. His salary had increased by 60%, and he now had final authority over all process safety decisions at the facility. "You will never guess who applied for the junior operator position yesterday," Keith said, sitting down at my table with a grin. "Zachary Caldwell. He spent the last 2 years working at a small logistics firm and realizes that his business degree does not help him understand how actual machinery works. He wants to start from the bottom, working shifts on the floor, to learn the processes." "Did you hire him?" I asked, smiling. "Yes," Keith replied. "He starts on Monday, but he will be wearing a blue uniform and spending his days cleaning filters and reading pressure gauges under the supervision of the senior operators. No management track, no strategic presentations. Just learning how to keep the refinery safe, one valve at a time." I laughed, looking out the window at the plant in the distance. The steam plumes from the cooling towers were steady and white, a sign of stable operations and balanced pressures. The refinery was running safely because the people in charge finally understood that the value of a system is not found in the algorithms that monitor it, but in the experience of the people who know how to keep it from failing. That evening, I sat on my front porch with my wife, Laura, drinking coffee as the sun went down. The 15 years left on our mortgage did not feel like a burden anymore, and Chloe was preparing to graduate at the top of her class at Purdue. The real satisfaction was not the money or the public downfall of the people who had undervalued me. It was knowing that my work had made the industry a little safer for the next generation of engineers, and that the lessons learned from one expensive failure had forced a large corporation to finally respect the quiet competence of the people who actually make things work. The best revenge is not a loud conflict, but the silent demonstration of your own worth, letting the system teach itself what happens when it loses the people who keep it alive. And as the evening air cooled, I knew that some lessons are worth every single dollar they cost to learn. I watched the sunset paint the sky in deep shades of gold and amber, feeling a deep sense of peace that had eluded me for months. Laura reached over and gently took my hand, her smile reflecting the quiet happiness that had settled in our home. We had built a life on doing things the right way, with integrity and patience, and now we were seeing the fruits of that dedication. Our daughter was thriving, learning the science that would shape the future, and she would enter a profession that had begun to respect the quiet knowledge of the veterans. It was a long journey, but it was worth every step. The lessons were learned, the system was safer, and we were finally home. The quiet ones had finished their work, and the results spoke for themselves.